City Commission to order. Roll call, please. Present.
Here.
Here.
All right. You may begin, Mr. Cruz.
All right, thank you. So the format for our special funds is going to fall just along the lines that we did with the general fund. We'll go through the proposal that I put on the front, just a couple of pages of some narrative, and then we can go through each fund. Most of the special funds we really can't do anything with, but there's the information there if you want it. Most of those are either SIDs that they're collected specifically to pay off that debt, and that's just what they do. But we will look at some of the numbers. So tonight's all the special funds. Special funds are really anything outside of the general fund. Our special funds fall into the 5 categories that we listed there. They're either special revenue, debt service, capital projects, enterprise funds, or trust funds. It's actually only one trust fund. That's the cemetery fund. We can talk a little bit about how that works. But the enterprise funds are where most of the conversation we will have tonight is. As I said, most of them already have a set source of revenue. They have a specific purpose of why they exist, and they're used for very limited purposes. The enterprise funds are a little different. They receive almost all their money from fees for service. That would be water, sewer, solid waste. Ambulance, while ambulance is a little different in that it does get tax money, the vast majority of the budget comes from fees for service versus taxes. And we can look at some of those numbers. So when we look at the enterprise funds, we're going to decide both this evening, both what the budget looks like and also any rate increases that we outlined. As far as your guidance, the chart there shows what the commission gave for goals for cash reserve. While the chart is interesting, some of the stories don't tell some of the numbers don't tell the whole story. Ambulance is a good example. We're well above our reserve on that, but we have not budgeted any capital replacement. If we had done that, there wouldn't be a reserve. So it looks pretty good right now, but once we actually start replacing some of the capital, that reserve will disappear fairly quickly. On the opposite end of that is down at solid waste, which looks like it is lagging far, far behind at 11% when our goal is 100. But this is the first time in how many years, Shannon, that this has been in the black? So this is the first time in 8 years that solid waste is not running a debt load on and drawing from other funds. So the 11% I count as a complete victory. So you can see the difference from some of the other funds. Light maintenance is in a good place, but that's a pretty limited fund. It's not that exciting. Dispatch, doesn't have hardly any of a reserve. They have never started a reserve in that fund before, so we just started holding a reserve in that particular fund for that particular operations. So that will slowly build over time. The sewer at 150%, that's almost driven completely by the debt service requirements for our USDA loan and the state revolving fund. That's why that is so high. Other than that, commission guidance is pretty varied throughout the strategic plan. It's all the projects you're looking at. It's all of the different transportation goals, the goals for first responder capabilities, energy savings. So a lot of that is incorporated into this budget, but it's kind of spread out and it's a little hard to identify, but we'll try and cover it as we go. As far as accounting changes go, you will see the same thing we saw in the general fund. Any fund that has personnel will see a significant increase in that cost because we're actually accounting for retirement and health insurance and those things in the fund where it's actually where it's actually realized. So you'll see that when we look back to compare it to previous years that all the costs will have increased significantly. That's just an accounting thing. The costs haven't actually increased significantly. They just are now accounted for in different places. And then as far as actual budget changes go, there's no significant change in, I would say, philosophy or priorities or goals. But obviously, as we go from project to project, different funds will see significant changes in costs depending on whether or not the projects we're currently working on are paid for out of those funds or not. Obviously, the street projects are going to hit street maintenance heavily, but they also hit gas tax. They also hit water and sewer. And we'll talk a little bit about storm sewer at the end, kind of as a aside, although we don't have a storm sewer fund, and that's probably a problem. Let's see. The vehicle barn is a pretty good project this year. I would say that's a preventive maintenance project. where it's not something we need, but I think it's something that will save us money in the long run by taking a little better care of the equipment we have to make it last longer. And then glass recycling is probably an issue that we need to discuss this evening. The contract that we brought before you a couple meetings ago gives us that ability now, and I think there's a community value associated with that, but there's also a cost associated with that of actually recycling it versus stockpiling it as we have been. There'll be, when we get to that, it's basically we are proposing to actually create a separate fee for recycling specifically so people can see the cost associated with it, and then they can make a decision on whether or not that's worth it to them. It's a pretty small fee. We're talking $1 a month that will show up on their bill separately as recycling fee. But we'll talk about that once we get to solid waste. Again, the same workman comp problem. I won't call it a problem. The workman comp situation that we had with the firefighters bleeds over into the ambulance fund. We'll have increased workman comp there as well, since those are the same workers. And then you can see there, that's the proposal for the rate changes that we have for you this evening. We can talk about them now, or we can talk about them when we get to the specific funds, but we're not looking for changes in sewer, street, or light maintenance. I wouldn't say those are all funded to the level we need them to be, but I think they're at a place where we can continue with our current projects without an increase this year. Our water rates are actually still below the target rates for the state, and we're not eligible for loans from the state because of that, because the state feels that Livingston residents aren't paying enough of their fair share for the state to provide any money on top of that. That being said, with some of the water projects we have going on, both on Main Street, the replacement on Park Street, 5th through 8th sewer. So that's going to require a 3% increase this year for the budget we proposed. Solid waste. It says solid waste, but really what's driving cost in solid waste is green waste. Between the free service we provide for green can pickup and the amount of green waste that we are receiving at the transfer station, those costs are significant. As Shannon was telling me the other day, we chipped all of our green waste to 0 in October. Is that right? October? So we were down at 0 in October. We are now stockpiled enough. We have to look at doing another burn. We have, would you say 5 years worth of chips for what we require for the wastewater treatment plant to mix in with the solids. We already have a 5-year stockpile of that. The amount of green waste that comes through, how many tons have we gotten this year so far?
I don't know tonnage wise, but I know we have about 350 cubic yards of material.
But we track that tonnage wise, don't we? Do we?
We do.
Yeah,
We can
that's
get
what I
that.
thought. I know, because I brought it and I'm pretty sure she weighs me in.
They do. We weigh it all in. We don't charge anybody.
Right.
So, and I think another issue that we probably need to bring up with the county is we also offer that service for free to the county. All county residents can bring in green waste for free. I'm sure, nobody from Cook City is hauling in their green waste, but I'm sure people from Green Acres and the 5-acre tracts are. So that is one thing we're not currently charging the county for, and we can look to recoup some fees there.
And when you say wood chips, is it okay if I ask a question?
Yeah.
When you say wood chips, do you mean like wood chips, or do you mean the like the compost, like the solid waste compost?
It's a mixture of both. So you actually chip the larger stuff, and that goes into actually the mulch that we create with the solids from the wastewater treatment plant. We actually mix that with the solids, the sludge that comes out, which would be a great thing that we're looking at trying to figure out how to get it out for use for the public.
And that's what you have to burn. I know these are rookie questions, but that's what you have to burn.
So what
because
we
nobody
actually are
uses-
going to have to burn is just like limbs, sticks, trees, grass clippings, leaves.
Well, the DEQ,
Really what's happening is the amount of green waste, which we classify as grass and trees, branches, stumps. We have enough stockpiled right now for 5 years of what we produce sludge at the plant.
Mhm.
And we do a 50/50 mixture of digested sludge
Mhm.
and
And then why does it have to be burned? Like, is it not available to the community, the chipped green waste?
That's not actually what we're burning. We're actually burning the rest of the green waste that has come in on top of that.
That's not chipped.
Yes, because we actually run out of space to store it.
Okay.
spent $17,000 last year bringing in a commercial chipper that we split costs with Bozeman, and it was $17,000 to chip 3,000.
So if that continues, if honestly, if green waste continues to come in at this pace, we may need to look at changing how we do it, and we may not take it at the transfer station anymore and actually make it go up to the Swingley Road facility, so it's further out of town, and stockpile it there. We have more room there, and I
Eliminates hauling.
Right.
You know, again, we're a transfer station, so anything that comes into our facility finds a home elsewhere, either at the
Like the
landfill
glass.
or in compost or up at our compost site on Swingley Road. So if we open the facility, that minimizes us. I don't like burning this close to town. So, you know, there's always a risk there that we have that one day a year where we have an inversion and the town fills up with smoke, or we have a high wind consequently afterwards. And, you know, our chief has been awesome. Their staff has helped numerous times when we burn the green waste. It's the gift that keeps on giving for the month or two.
Is it standard that it's free in most communities in the Mountain West? I'm just curious.
I
Like,
don't think so. That's it.
Logan landfill charges $27 a ton to dispose green waste.
just asking.
So
asking for a friend.
and that is, it is one of those services that we have offered traditionally, I think, that has cost the city quite a bit, and we aren't recouping any of the cost. And that's why, and honestly, the $2 per month increase in solid waste is a lot of it is to offset the additional route for the truck drivers to go out and pick up the green cans, you know, the wear and tear on the actual vehicles themselves, the hauling up to the other facility on Swingley Road. There's a lot of cost associated with the green waste, even though, you know, burning it doesn't sound like it's going to cost a lot. The manpower that goes into that. How long was the last burn we did that we had to staff it 24/7?
Well, three full days of 24-hour coverage. And then we get it to a point where it's basically a huge ash pile with lots of embers. And again, we've had flare-ups several weeks after we've done the initial burn. So
Have you ever
and,
had?
and then we have the ash to deal with.
Yeah.
Which is obviously a less volume than the trees and the green waste itself, but it still is something that doesn't meet the classification for our Swingley Road site, so it needs to be loaded up all the time.
Ever have any trouble with spontaneous combustion with the grass piling
We
up?
have actually, but I wouldn't say that it's true spontaneous combustion. We obviously don't have staff out there monitoring, but it only takes one cigarette butt
Yeah.
from someone dumping near that pile.
All right.
What are the long-term goals for this topic? Because it seems like there's many ways that it could be approached that could be more beneficial to the residents and the city.
I think that is actually the process that we're in now, is trying to figure out what does the future look like. I think we're probably at the limit of what we can do the way we've been doing it. And honestly, the cost increase will cover the cost that has been associated with that, but it also is hopefully to do a few other things, like put cameras out at the recycling station so that we can open recycling for longer hours than we currently do, so that people can recycle after hours when there's nobody out there. But the security is an issue, because if someone comes in and dumps garbage in the recycling, then that entire container has to go through the transfer station to the landfill, and we lose out on all the recycling, and the city has to pay for that disposal cost. So there has to be some kind of accountability to make sure that people are only recycling the correct items. So there's some cost to building that infrastructure so that we can extend the service to greater hours. I know it doesn't seem like it'd be that complicated, does it?
It seems like it seems to me like there would be it's an opportunity to change the way we do it. And it could be, I mean, green waste is a thing that a lot of people don't want to see that get burned.
Right.
But they would happily take it back in another form than branches if there was a way
Right.
to receive
And
it.
trying to keep it out of the landfill as well.
Yeah.
Or out of the transfer station, I should say,
Yeah.
which costs us.
But I understand that would takes humans and money. So
It
I would
does.
be curious to hear what the long-term, because I'm sure you're all thinking about it, and I'm sure you know what I'm thinking already. 'Cause we talked about things. But I know it all costs money. So,
My
and people,
philosophy is it can be recycled or reused.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
The problem is we as administration were put in a tough situation quite a few years ago. We have a huge amount of green waste on our Swingley Road already kind of started well in the hole. And to try to minimize increasing that impact. The last 6 years, we've done a combination of burning using our tuck grinder, and then this last year bringing in a commercial chipper, which actually it's a really nice product, and it certainly is free to the public, and we do have people come in and get that. But there again, it was a $17,000 charge to have that product created.
Yeah, exactly.
As a result, we still have 5 years worth of what we produce. It's, of sludge at our wastewater facility. So, I'm very happy that we can turn it into a compost. It's very good, and we have the wood chips. But the magnitude of green waste coming into our very finite facility is really overwhelming.
Sounds like it.
Right. And it defects even in the wastewater treatment plant project. How much was the screen we bought for the compost?
About 40,000.
Yeah, we spent 40,000 on basically an industrial screener that would help us make a better product so that hopefully people could use more of it. So we've been looking at ways to try and cut down.
Commercialize it a little bit.
The screen makes a better product, but it also creates what we're screening off can actually be used in composting. So you have this larger green waste that actually you can keep recycling. So in essence, we're going to need less of the green waste because of the screen.
Right. So it helps and it hurts.
And a good public education campaign at doing it at your own house, is a good thing too. I mean, I very seldom ever take anything there to compost it at home. I don't bag my clippings; they go back on the grass. But whatever. Okay, on with the budget.
Thank you.
So-
Thank you. Thank you.
So, so moving on to page 3, these are the same mill levies that we looked at for the general fund, but I just want to point out a little bit that the mill levies at the top were the ones we were talking before, the ones that were subject to limit. Now it's the voted mill levies that fall into some of the other categories. We'll talk about the permissive health insurance, the fire truck bonds, the ambulance mill levy, and we can hit those as we go to each of the funds. But you can see that comparatively, the voted mill levies and the levies not subject to the limit are pretty small compared to the overall tax burden. It's 191 versus the 38 or whatever it is. And the vast majority of that is a permissive health insurance, which is at 32.54. So the state realized that cities couldn't afford health insurance and maintain the tax restrictions that they had placed upon us. So there's actually a exception for permissive health insurance levy that isn't voted, but that cities can levy to cover specifically health insurance costs only. With that, we'll go to the fun part on page 5. What we've done is we've put the summary of each of the funds by category, and then the line items are later. So we can go through the overall, just the quick overview, and then we can dive into as much of the line items as you want or don't want. Comprehensive liability, again, that one is that one's actually out of the limited mill levies, but that goes towards our liability insurance. You can see the projected for FY19 is 326, budgeted at 313 for FY20, and total expenditures in at 311. This is one of those where we don't need to hold a reserve. This is only for insurance. And so we're looking at not much of a change for this year. Revenue going from 326 to 313, and expenses going from 296 to 311. The soccer fields, currently there's nothing in that one. That's the fund we've been using for LYSA in the Northside Park, but we don't currently have any projects ongoing there, so there's no anticipated revenue or expenses. On page 6, you'll see Summerfest. That we have handed off to the community, and so the community will be hosting Summerfest. Forget who's hosting. Is it the office? Is it the... Yeah, I think the office and Neptunes have stepped up to host Summerfest, so they'll be the sponsors. So that fund will eventually go away as it drops off our books. The library is kind of is an odd duck in our budget because we don't actually control the revenue or the expenditures. If you go back to the mill levy page, this is a shared cost between the city and the county. So the city right now is at 7 mill levies for the library, 7 mills for the library that comes out of our limit. The county, I think, contributes the same amount, but not the same mills because our mills are worth different. But the library board itself runs the budget on that. But again, they are deficit spending this year, but they are well aware of what they're doing. They'd saved up some money and are spending some extra this year. So I have no concerns with the library budget. The emergency disaster fund, that's one of the success stories for this year. So that's been around since I think the last big flood. There was a overage that has been sitting there for several years. So we're actually using some general fund money. We're paying that off this year. So that was one of those where it's not a real fund, right? So that's just a drain on the reserve of the general fund every year. So we're just writing it off. We'll get that fund zeroed out as well. Health sanitarian, there's no, that's just a leftover. There's nothing there as well. Dispatch is obviously one of the large costs. When you talk anything that's staffed 24/7, the personnel costs are going to be high. And you can see the projected to the budget for this year goes up significantly. And those are those costs that we were talking about would show up. That's the health insurance and the retirement. You can see that we basically we're not seeing almost $175,000 worth of cost in the dispatch fund that we will now see. So you can tell where it is. Of that, you can tell, I like the breakdown. Personnel and benefits is 598,000 of the 780,000. So almost all the cost is personnel and benefits. Operations, a lot of that's just equipment. And then you can see we broke that down there as public safety. So just as an aside, these categories, when we do the full budget, you'll actually get a full wrap up of the entire budget for the entire city across all the funds, how much is spent by those functions. Personnel and benefits, operations, and capital. So it kind of give you a better picture, I think, of where we spend our money. But you can see the operations is not increasing that much. We're looking about a $10,000 increase in operations. We're still struggling in dispatch just with personnel, trying to fill all the slots. That's still a constant struggle. I think that's probably a common theme that we see currently, and I see it only getting worse from here on out.
I'm gonna say it's an ongoing thing. Yeah.
It is. You see it. We've seen it in the police department. We've seen it in the dispatch, public works, trying to get summer employees, honestly, the city is just not competitive right now at our wages. Really, unless you're looking for a long-term job that has some pretty good benefits, especially retirement, the city's not that appealing. And so it's, especially with housing prices, it's getting harder and harder to recruit.
Jobs are plentiful and workers are not.
That's correct. Well, and I don't know
Saturated.
if you've seen the new modulars going up along the interstate down there on Love's Lane. I don't know. How big do you think those are? 800 square feet?
Something like that. And my brother-in-law was doing. one.
Yeah. You know what the starting price on them is? 220,000 for a modular.
I just found out about it.
Yeah. I mean, they're actually, I mean, they're nice ones,
Oh,
but
they look nice.
We
Yeah.
have construction projects going on in town that aren't city administered where laborers are getting $28 an hour.
Oh,
so
And this is a Montana and Mountain West issue, not just a Livingston issue.
it
I
is absolutely.
I think it's nationwide. I mean, it's,
But that doesn't have anything to do with dispatch. So the urban renewal district, actually, I think this is we've made some great progress with URA and the way we budget and how we do things.
I'm sorry.
Up
Jumping ahead.
Oh, sorry. We're on page 9. If you look down at the bottom, you'll see beginning fund balance for this year is $46,000 to the negative. That's actually also includes our restricted balance that we are holding aside for payments. So I've, in the last couple of meetings with the URA, I've let them know they're starting the year without any money. We are letting them pay for a couple of things they usually do, which is flower baskets.
Again,
They pay for they pay for half of the flower beds. Yes. Yep. So there's some minor costs that'll be coming out this year, but we project them through the year to have about $33,000 at the end of this fiscal year as a balance.
skate park paid back the loan, right? I assume.
The funny part is that the skate park never actually took any money.
But they never had to.
They never had to take
Okay.
any of the money, so that worked out great. But what we're setting up with the URA, and really I've said they have most of this year to figure this out, is at the beginning of next year, we'll say, okay, this is the money that's collected and set aside for you. This is what you have for your projects. And then they will be able to budget for next year with the money that was collected this year. So they're actually not going to work on a projected budget, but on an actual cash on hand budget. And they're looking at having a couple open windows for applications for grants, decide how much will go towards street furniture, bike racks, and that kind of stuff. And they'll actually be able to do their budget at the beginning of the year, and they'll know exactly what they have available.
Right, because that's been contentious in the past.
Right. And so they'll know exactly ahead of time what they can spend. They'll decide what their programs look like, how much of that percentage of that will go to each program, and then they can move forward from there. So I think it'll make it a lot cleaner. I think it'll make it easier for them to understand where their money is going. And then we always have the correct amount of money set aside for cover the debt service. So I think that will be a much improved process. The PERD is one of the retirement funds, so that's why that is now going away. That'll be incorporated. Same with the health insurance, that'll be incorporated. Permissive health insurance, that's the levy that I was talking about a little bit earlier, the one that we can do in top. You can see it's a significant amount of money. And that is, so that is what we are paying for. And it's not even 100% of it, but it's all of 100% of what's there is used for employee health insurance benefits. There's other money budgeted for health insurance benefits, but this one comes specifically from that mill that's levied.
It covers about 62% of our employee health insurance costs for general fund employees. You cannot levy that in enterprise
Yeah.
funds.
Oh, okay.
So
And the employee picks up the other
the employee picks up a portion.
28% or whatever it is.
No, it's
No.
the 62% is of our portion. The mill levy only covers 62%
wait,
of
no,
our portion.
My math sucks.
Right. The other 28% it comes out of the
Coming
general
out of
fund.
there. No,
Right. And then that's only of our portion. And then their portion depends on what kind of plan they have.
Right.
And whether it's a family plan, a single plan, high deductible, and then they still have to cover.
Yep.
I think what the family plan, are they still covering like 1,000?
I don't know.
It's still significant what the city, what the actual employees have to contribute, depending, for the single young guys, it's not so bad, but for families, it's still a significant amount of
Oh, yeah,
money.
same with the school district. I mean,
Yes.
insane. Even for me, yeah.
So, the CDBG, let's see, so police pension and fire pension, again, those will go away. I think this is simplifying the budget quite a bit. It's just to get rid of these additional funds. The CDBG revolving loan fund, you can see there's quite a bit of capital available there. And now that the extension office has taken that over, I just sat down with Katie today. I think they're signing the final paperwork to take over all of the loans from Prospera. That will be available to loan out. I'd say that has been lightly or underutilized over the past several years, and I'm hopeful that we can get some of the money out there. Because as we collect that interest back, that'll only build the available amount we have. Impact fees are always kind of a crapshoot because it just depends on what people build. So I think you can see we're projected 81,000 in FY19, but we only budgeted 66,000 in FY20. We try to be conservative with that. We'd rather budget low than not have what we expected. On page 14 for the light maintenance district. So the light maintenance district has been, it's pretty consistent in what it brings in. It's going to bring in about 150,000. As new properties are added, that will go up as long as they're in the district. You can see we have been running a deficit for a couple of years, and we still are. It's still gives us a healthy ending fund balance in this. One of the costs in the light maintenance district is we are slowly trying to transition to LED lighting, which comes at somewhat of a cost. Cameron's been working on the agreements we have with Northwestern Energy, where we can go with that. City-owned versus Northwestern Energy-owned lights. So we're doing some of the comparisons and seeing if speeding that up may bring a quicker return on investment. But for now, where it's at, we are really only replacing as old fixtures fail. As they fail, we're repeating them.
Just to clarify, that debt service is a formula error. It's capital. It's not a debt service expense.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. No, we don't have any debt in
We
the
don't
in
have
the
any
maintenance.
debt.
Say,
I
yeah.
caught that today.
But that's
Oh, yeah, I see that now, yeah.
that has been pretty straightforward. I think we're making good progress with that. One of the things Shannon was mentioning is that the technology changes so quickly on the LED lighting.
Man, no kidding.
Trying to maintain a consistency across the city is difficult because things become obsolete so fast. So
My house. God.
it's true.
Thing is that LED bulbs now are down below $50.
For the so-called sodium vapor, the old
Yeah, for the LED.
We have high pressure sodium.
high
and
pressure.
another
Yeah.
So I think that's a good project and it will save us money over the long run.
Yeah.
It's just, there's only
If it
so
costs
much we
money
can
to
do.
it, yeah.
It's just a longer process, but eventually we will go, it'll be 100% LED through attrition, which I think is better than nothing. As far as street maintenance goes, obviously there's a lot of street maintenance costs this year specifically. It's been a tough year in the streets. Long term, we would love to look at doing some special improvement districts and adding streets in places that don't have them. But there's a lot of, while that sounds easy, it actually is pretty complex when you start talking about sewer water and especially storm sewer. Um, as we look at storm water, especially from the north side and how that would come off, there's already a bottleneck at the bottom of the north side, and adding actual storm sewer to take it that way may make that worse. So trying to figure out how much water the ditch could take, and if we could get an agreement with them to take it. There's gonna be a lot of things we have to do before we can start looking at actually putting new street down. As far as this year goes, this will cover maintenance costs. A lot of it also will go towards the, you can see 172,000 for capital there as we go to the downtown project. Some other replacements. Again, personnel and benefits is still a significant cost in the street maintenance fund, just because that is, you're talking street crews, you're talking street sweeper. Um, Personnel and benefits you'll see is going to be a large cost in almost every fund.
Everything.
Till you get to sewer and water, then maybe the capital costs outweigh it, but it's still significant. But nothing new and exciting in the street maintenance fund. Sidewalks, that some of that comes from as businesses pay off their costs for the downtown project. That would come into this. And that'll vary wildly depending on if people decide to finance it on their taxes or whether they want to come in and pay cash for it. So you'll see some fluctuations in there. Business Improvement District, we're pretty much just a pass through for them. We'll collect what they've determined and we will pass it on to them and then they spend it. Park improvement, there's quite a bit of money there, sort of, but that's all, especially when we get to line item, that's all dedicated to certain items. There's a Sacagawea statue fund. There's still part of the Skillman Trust in there. So a lot of that is limited on how we can actually use it. So you can see there's really no expenditures this year that we expect out of that fund.
We didn't exhaust that Skillman fund.
I think there's still a little bit left. It's not much. You can see the cost from last year were the skate park. That's why there's so much money
Yeah.
from there from last year. Law enforcement joint equipment, that's just one of those odd little funds that we have that people can contribute. So you'll sometimes see money in there. We don't really count on it for anything. And then finally is the gas tax. So you'll hear this referred to as the BARSA funds, but this is the actual gas tax money we have. We were pretty early on getting these funds, applying for them and using them. A lot of it will go towards the downtown street project, but a significant amount goes towards just the products used to maintain the road: asphalt, road mix, chip seal, de-icer, yeah, all those kind of. Yep, all those stuff will come out of gas tax.
Land.
And it has been nice. The increase in the gas tax has made that a lot easier. That's one of the reasons we didn't need to increase the street maintenance fund, is because the gas tax fund has gone up. And was it another 2 years it's going to go up? How long before they hit the end? Yeah. So there's still a ways to go. Right. So there's probably still another 80 to 100,000 as they ramp up the gas tax that will come in this fund. So that is all of the special revenue funds, I believe. Yep, special revenue funds. We have the line items for those. Is there any of those funds you'd like to dive into the line item budget on? not, we can move on. I got to find my next section.
Oh, on the dispatch?
Mhm.
I guess that's 31. Um, there's one, increase of 350%. Is that, switching from another, funding source? Fourth one down.
The workman's comp.
Yeah,
I can answer that. So
Put you on mic. Gotta push it. It's hard. Gotta push it.
I thought you did. We actually went through and evaluated all the work comp codes that we had for our employees this year to make sure that we were budgeting for them appropriately. And turns out that we had the dispatchers at a lower work comp rate than we were actually paying. So they are actually paid, we pay work comp at the same rate on dispatchers that we do on police officers.
Unbelievable.
thank you.
Were you going to talk more about storm sewer, like stormwater, or
I
Is that-
can. I was going to kind of leave that for the enterprise fund section.
Thank you. I'll wait.
Sure. So the next section of funds are debt service funds. They start on page 63. There's really nothing we can do with these, but it's interesting to look at some of them. The first one's the Firetruck general obligation bond. You can see we're looking at 32,000 in assessments, and it pays off the debt service. So it's just straight up debt service on the Firetruck general obligation bond. The next one is the 2,000 Firetruck obligation bond, and this is the last year on that one. Or is it one more year? I always get that wrong.
Nope, it's the last year.
So this will be the last year we pay off on this. So going back to that mill levy sheet, the fire truck will drop off next year, and those mill levies will go away, which is good for everybody paying taxes. So that's a great thing. The West End Tax Increment District, really that is solely printing for less. That is their money. We've been working with them over the past couple of months. They have actually been utilizing this fund to do some good upgrades in that area as far as parking lots, streets, utility extensions that benefit them, but still meet the requirements for use from the tax increment financing. So really the West End Tax Increment District is a TIF, but it's a one payer TIF, and they don't have a board that runs it. We manage it as the city. So we work with their developer to provide them. We use some of it for, I think last year we used it to upgrade the Starlow booster station. This year they're using it for more projects on the actual property itself, street extensions, some of those things. So that's significant. I think it's only got 2 or 3 more years left before it runs out, and then that tax money will come back into the general fund. SID revolving, there's nothing really there. It just sits there. The West End, so there's the West End Tax Increment District. This is the West End SID. I think that was that sewer or water? That was SID, both. Excuse me. So they're also paying that special improvement district, and it's going to pay off infrastructure that's already in place. So it's just debt service. Same thing for the Carroll Lane. I believe that was the water to Carroll Lane. You can see that one's done a little differently, but where it's still just paying off the debt service on that project.
One of these days.
I think this Carroll Lane has sewer, right? So they have
But
both.
Is everybody hooked up to it?
I think they are.
Oh, okay, because I thought somebody at the end told me to start septic field.
There is one house that has septic, and it's not actually on Carroll Lane. It's the end of my street.
Oh, okay. I'm just curious, yeah.
So if you go on to page 77, that's our capital improvement fund. We will probably look at using this differently in out years. Currently, because we put most of our capital in the fund, unless it's coded correctly, that money doesn't get rolled from year to year. And so as we identify and earmark money for specific capital improvements, we might start holding them in this fund. And that way they are there no matter when that money is spent. And it just kind of cleans up the budgeting process. So you're not, it looks like you you did a great job on your budget, but you actually didn't spend your capital and you're using that to cover operational overruns. And so if we move around how we account for that, it might, I think, give a clearer picture, be a little more transparent.
Yeah, that's gonna say a little more honest.
But right now we're not doing much with it. Same thing with the library capital improvement fund. The railroad crossing levy, that one was interesting. That one ended up, if you see under revenues, there's 8,000. That's actually 8,000 out of the general fund. The levy didn't quite cover the cost associated with it, so we've been subsidizing the fund from the general fund to make sure that it had enough money to pay off its last few years of debt service. And that one has 2 more years.
Yeah, 1 or 2 more years.
So that one will also drop off of the mill levies in 1 or 2 years.
It's
And-
actually directly related to the purchase of the Star Road facility.
Yeah.
So the fund balance was already there, but there wasn't enough fund balance to cover the debt service to purchase that Star Road facility. So
Right. And then fire truck bond proceeds, you can see there's nothing in that one. So now's the interesting part, the enterprise funds, starting on page 86. So water is the first one you can look at, and these numbers are with the requested 3% increase. So you can see the FY20 budget for revenue is about 1.7 million versus the 1.628 we were at in FY19. But you can also see that the expenditures have gone to 1.93 versus 1.65. And that's due largely to some of the capital projects. You can see they $754,000 in capital projects that are scheduled for FY20. Again, most of that is a public works, and personnel and benefits is still over $500,000 in that fund. The ending balance, you can see, even though we are projecting to increase the rate, we're actually still deficit spending by about $200,000 in that fund. So while we are asking for an increase, it's not actually covering the costs of what we're doing. So we'll have to look at future years, hoping that maybe there won't be as much capital projects in the out years, and that'll even out. But we will have to keep a close.
I was just gonna say, no way.
We can hope.
Yeah, the pipes aren't getting any newer.
Right. But I think we're at that place with the water where we were with the sewer, that we're probably going to see steady rate increases just because
Yeah.
at the rate the infrastructure is failing. And that's,
A given.
it is. I kind of feel like the citizens in the early 1900s that built all the infrastructure initially, there was a huge investment that they made that people lived off of for 100 years.
Yeah.
And now we're in that cycle where
Bills do again.
the bills do again. That's exactly right. So we can go through some of the specifics on the water when we get to the line item. I'll tell you, there's nothing exciting in there. It's pretty much normal operations plus some capital projects. Sewer is the same way. In this case, we're looking at 2.46. In this case, we're not looking for a rate increase in here. We already had our target rates for sewer, as well as being able to cover the debt service. So that one's actually looking pretty good. We are deficit spending by a little, like just over $100,000, but it'll still have nearly a $2 million balance at the end of the year. So
Which we have to have.
we do, yep.
Doing well.
You are doing good. Solid waste, we talked about a lot of the issues with solid waste already. This one, as Shannon had said, has been running in the red for about 8 years. Adjusting the city-county compact has helped that significantly. The original compact didn't increase the county's rates, even though our costs went up. So we lost quite a bit. There's currently an automatic elevator in our current compact. So as our costs go up, the county pays their portion of those costs.
Yeah.
That has worked out really well. And this is where the green waste and the recycling costs come into play. So this budget accounts for, and we didn't get the recycling costs in, right? Yeah, so I think it accounts for the revenue, but not the cost. So I would
We were
expect
short about 20.
about 20,000. Yeah. So expect the cost to be a little bit higher than this, but overall, I think for $1 a month for a residential account and $2 a month for a commercial account, we would cover our recycling costs and be able to provide true recycling of glass.
Does that mean, what does that mean? Does that mean the facilities are available and people will bring it in
Yeah,
if they
so
want to recycle.
current, yeah, it wouldn't be pickup, but
Correct.
it'd be like it currently is, but instead of stockpiling it, we would actually send it to a recycler to be recycled.
That seems like a really low amount to me.
It's really
A
cheap.
dollar
Yeah.
for glass when a lot of Montana won't even recycle glass.
Yeah, Bozeman's just started taking
And
it
I,
again.
they're probably the first. I don't know where else recycles glass in Montana.
Well, we were the only one.
Missoula
Nobody
wasn't
was.
doing it. Missoula was sending it
No.
out of state, right?
It is available commercially in Bozeman.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means, but I know $1 a month seems low.
Yeah.
Well,
Like, is 80?
based on our 4 to 5 ton of collection a week, and the rates that the commission approved with Four Corners, we're gonna be around $28,000. Probably pick up and delivery to their facility and haul it.
And will this take care of the stockpile also? It includes getting rid of the stockpile, or
No, we just hang on to that. That's gold.
Right. We'll probably slowly eat away at that.
We have some projects that it's gonna get recycled too.
So it actually works great as fill because it drains wonderfully.
I just
Um,
was surprised. $1 seems really low to me for glass. So
we think it's a pretty good deal.
yeah, I feel
honestly.
like it seems.
And if you're wondering why the commercial is more expensive than the residential,
Nope.
the bars recycle a ton of glass.
I know. I've seen my brother
Ton of
recycle.
glass.
it. Yeah.
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 He's glad he can do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great service for them. So I don't think $2 a month is going to be
No, hell no.
objectionable to the businesses either.
I don't recycle my glass.
It should
Oh,
cost a lot less
yeah.
than throwing it away.
Well, thanks to whoever we need to thank to bring glass recycling to Livingston. I think that's important. Good job.
I'm happy if the community embraces this increase that really covers the cost.
So that does mean in total for solid waste, residents will see a $3 a month increase, $1 for recycling and $2 for the solid waste itself to cover mostly green waste costs, but also increased route costs as we're looking at,
Right. Yeah.
as we grow, there's more and more routes that need to be taken. Right. Well, and I think that's a great point. When was the last time we raised solid waste costs?
Yeah. It was
Yeah.
what we
So it's been,
adjusted. Finally, we got a better read on what it was actually costing.
Right.
us.
when we finished the study, we adjusted the cost. So it's been flat for 3 years. So this is probably time to catch back up.
You can always tag more on the commercial. I mean, construction waste.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of that lately.
One thing that we have been, so, obviously, rate increases for residential, commercial, needs commission approval, but, it's been an administrative duty to raise the fees over the scale.
Right.
And by doing that over the last 3 to 4 years, it certainly had a huge impact on our revenues, and it's not scaring anybody away.
No,
We're
it's still
working
cheap.
directly, by the month on
Yeah.
what we're capitalizing.
In fact, the number one problem we usually face with solid waste is to run out of trucks. And we've had to shut down the transfer station a couple times just because there were no more semis to pull through it.
Oh, no.
We haven't had to technically do that just yet.
Not this year.
Piled our transfer station to the point where you can't really find much room to walk in there.
Yeah.
But, yeah, when we're loading 4 to 6 trailers a day, you're talking, 160 to 80 tons of material coming into the facility on a daily basis.
But I think one of the things that I think most of the community and countywide appreciates is that there's no landfill in the county, right? There's none of this waste is actually staying in Park County, which is a benefit.
Professionally run.
Right.
landfill.
It is, and there's
That don't know what they're doing.
and I think that's good for everybody. I mean, So, so we can talk more about solid waste if you'd like when we get to the line item budget, but that's probably the biggest issue changing in this budget. Ambulance services, it's actually a pretty good news story. Although budgeting the ambulance service is a little like playing craps. It really just comes down to how many transfers we do. Transfers are a huge effect on revenue. Obviously, are also a huge effect on expenditures, but they are moneymakers. If there's anything that actually brings revenue into the ambulance fund, it's transfers. If you look at the taxes and assessments there, you're looking at 25,000 from city mills. You're looking at 275,000 from both the county-wide mill and the county-only mill. So you're at 300,000. You're at 1.3 million for fees for services. So it is funded almost exclusively through fees for services, which you can adjust based on, payer rates of Medicaid. But that's, 1.6 million just for the ambulance service is quite a bit, but it's a great service. But you can see 1.3 million is personnel and benefits. That's by far the largest cost, because by far the largest time is guys sitting there waiting to go. It's not when they're actually out. But this year, we actually are projecting, if you look at the FY19 budget at the very bottom, ending fund balance, when we budgeted last year, we expected $158,000 fund balance. We're actually projecting to come in about a $436,000 fund balance. Transfer rates have been, would you call them stellar?
Probably 6 months has exceeded probably any time in our history. We probably did more in the last 6 months than we would normally do in a year. Now that's starting to drop off because AMR and Bozeman is trying really hard, in their words, to put us at a
Come over and pick it up.
They picked up a few more of those. We're still doing 2 to 3 weeks out.
So that's a good news story. That's a good balance to have. It covers our reserve. You notice there's no significant capital costs in there. We haven't budgeted to replace any of the ambulances. We are probably going to have to. That'll probably be a budget amendment at some point, just because of the maintenance that's going on currently. That's something that's going to have to. So I would expect that ending balance not to end there. I would expect to have to purchase one. We're hopefully waiting for the results from the mill levy election next week, and that'll inform how we budget that. If we can count on that revenue, then we can look at some different ways to finance that. But there's still a lot to be done. All 4 ambulances will probably need to be replaced in the next 4 to 5 years. So, and that doesn't include the $200,000 monitor replacements that are needed because they're no longer supported by the manufacturer. So there's a significant amount of cost that, so this looks nice, but
Yeah, but
it's not really the full story when it comes to the budget, but we'll update that as we go. So, let me see if there's any highlights in the line items that we can talk about. The costs for water, sewer, and solid waste are set for the next 3 years. Do we get 3-year contract with AFSCME?
Yes.
Yeah, so we can budget that out accurately over the next 3 years. You can see about halfway down the page on 92, some of the capital outlay there with $40,000 for some LED lighting, some roof repairs. We're not doing the 6th and 7th. Is that right, Shannon? Yeah, so the 6th and 7th isn't in there. It's listed, but it's not actually in the cost. That's the 10-inch rehab for the Park Street. And then I don't think we're doing the loop under the railroad tracks this year, but we're still looking at that.
that's one where we're blasting.
We're hoping to blast. We're gonna have to actually run a sewer camera to make sure.
See that you can. Yeah. Okay.
We'd like the live video feed of that, please.
Hard water deposits.
Sounds good.
And I will point out something because I think it's important to understand in how the city financing works. That a lot of people find squirrely, but it's just the way things work. If you look on page 93 at the bottom, you'll see administrative cost allocation. That's about $180,000. That's what the general fund charges the water fund for the services they receive from employees in the general fund. So that's for their legal support, for their support from finance, for their support from HR, for my time. So $180,000 of general fund cost is offset by the water fund, paying for the services that they receive out of general fund employees. And you'll see that in all of these funds. There's an administrative cost allocation. Uh, it's kind of a strange accounting tool, but because the general fund has no mechanism to increase its revenue, it has to charge for the services it provides to the funds that are paid for through fees or services.
It's really, and it's not an uncommon accounting practice.
No, it's pretty
for
common.
governments.
Mike, if I might just add that, I put in a wrong budget for our water analysis and treatment. It showed that $1,800 there, that was actually the increase, so my proposal there was to bump that up to 12,000.
Where are you, Shannon? What page?
He's on the first line on page 92.
92. Thank you.
And really that is dictated, DEQ, has a sampling schedule, and next year we'll have to do another round of lead and copper samples. Pretty expensive.
So what is it going to be, you said, instead of 1,800?
12,000. Right. So if you're looking at total expenditures, it's going to take it from 1.93 million to
Because
1.94.
2019 was 10 too, so.
Yeah.
Go to 1,800 and whoa,
That'd be great.
yeah,
Just not true.
wish.
So looking, going to sewer line item, you can see again, services, they're looking at about 2.3 million. I don't think there's anything interesting in there. Salaries, again, all the public works employees are split to whatever fund they are actually working against. If the roaming crew is helping water, they go against the water fund. If they're helping sewer, it goes against the sewer fund. So that isn't a set number of employees as much as a set number of employee hours. Again, in the capital layout, we've been trying to provide notes for you guys in the capital layout just so you can kind of see what we're looking at. So on page 96, halfway down, you can see there's the flow meter and data logs, the 5th to 8th Street rehab, and the engineering for that, Clark Street rehab, the infiltration and,
INI study.
yeah, what's the second I?
And inflow.
An infiltration and inflow study. So we've talked about that a few times with you guys, but it's so the plant's there, it has a great capacity, but we're treating a lot of river water that doesn't need to be treated because it's entering the sewer system through broken, through the collection system. So we're looking at spending $45,000 to study where those breaks are so that we can prioritize them and fix them in a way that actually increases the capacity of our current new wastewater treatment plant. I would say, right.
Quite a bit of instrumentation has to be put out in our collection system to monitor for that.
And we don't have the Civic Center project in this budget, correct?
We do not.
Right. So that's one that we're currently waiting to hear back on our grant, is if we can extend the sewer system to the Civic Center. That was a $450,000 grant? Is that right?
450, we have about 100,000 of our contribution.
Right. So that'll be a great project, but we're just waiting back to hear from the state. I think those are all closed out. They're just haven't decided the awards yet. It is a good sign that there were several infrastructure bills that went through this year. There should be a larger amount of money than is usually available, but really it just comes down to the other projects that applied and how they compare.
And we're looking at that and bringing that online with hopefully the assumption that something new will be going in there.
Yes, although
Capacity will be there.
the capacity will be there if something new comes online, but if it doesn't, it will allow us to
Still-
actually put the current Civic Center on the sewer system instead of septic, as well as the vault toilets to actually change over to be on the sewer in Miles Park and even Sacagawea. Yeah. So in general, we frown upon having a septic,
Underside,
a
yeah.
septic
Yep,
system
septic.
100 yards from the Yellowstone River.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no.
Things were different in the work public administration age. On page 98, you can see the sewers administrative cost allocation is even higher than water. It's based basically on their activity, how much they're spending, and obviously sewer is spending quite a bit more than water currently. As far as solid waste goes, I think we've covered most of that. The garbage collection charges are continuing to go up. You'll see there through our conversion to the new system, we're changing the way that we've tracked a lot of this stuff. I think we're getting some better numbers, understand our payer mix a little better, but we'll continue to try and make sure that that's a viable service in the long term, because there's very few things that upset people more than not to have their garbage picked up. One might be to have their sewer back up, but
Mhm.
between them, neither one is very pleasant. You can see one of the things that are looking at is some upgrades to vehicles and automatic gate, and we're looking at some roll-off containers. We're not looking to go large scale into the roll-off business, but there are a few customers where roll-off makes a lot of sense. Albertsons being one. I think PFL's looking at one maybe. Yeah. It's a lot easier for us as far as it cuts down on pickups and
Right. Yeah.
cans needed and that kind of thing. One added benefit, and if we can figure it out, is the roll-offs actually will hold a lot more snow than dump trucks, so it may actually help in snow removal as well, if we can use roll-offs to haul the snow off instead of the standard dump trucks.
Right. Yeah.
So if we can figure out how to combine that with a snow blower in front of one of the trucks, we'll be in business. But we're looking at ways to more efficiently remove the snow so that if we do have these type of events, we can remove it faster without as much labor as we're currently spending on it. So that's probably a weird.
Yeah. If the weather pattern continues the way it has, man, gotta do something different.
So the administrative cost allocation for the solid waste is about $200,000.
Right.
So you can tell between the three enterprise funds, a significant amount of general fund costs are covered. What are we up to? What are we at, 500,000 out of a $4 million budget? You're talking, 12%. Yeah, it is probably.
With
Oh,
ambulance.
if you throw in ambulance and street maintenance, yeah, it's probably closer to 600,000 out of a $4 million budget. So to not use that method would cause a significant change in the way we would have to operate the general fund together. I mean, we'd have to make about $600,000 in cuts out of the general fund. Ambulance, again, this is really going to be dependent on the transfers and what we have to do for maintenance for the ambulances, and if we do need to replace one of the ambulances, which we will. If you haven't seen the new command truck yet, that's actually a good news story. We got that used. Montana Auto Traders on the corner there of B and Park gave us a great deal on it. The Whistler gave us a great deal on putting all the decals and stickers and reflectors on it. So it was a used truck, but it's in really great shape, and it's something I think we'll be able to use for a long time. Other than that, there's nothing significant in the ambulance. We are recognizing some savings from how we're utilizing the reserves and calling back fewer guys. If there's a reserve on shift, being able to use them.
Cover that.
Yeah, that has resulted in some cost savings. So some of the operational changes have helped. It's super complicated to figure out how much it's helped when you look at how much more you're paying the reserves and what callback would have been. Then you have to overtime versus guys are taking their vacation, so there's some non-monetary benefits to it as well. But overall, it really is a good news story as far as what we thought it was going to be at this point. So the very last fund, so that was the end of the enterprise funds. The very last one is our trust fund, our perpetual cemetery fund. So this comes from services at the cemetery, sale of plots, the deeds for plots, grave openings, grave closings. All that is where the money comes from. Because it's a perpetual fund, we're not allowed to touch the principal. We're only allowed to touch the interest on it. But we do use it to offset some of the costs of maintaining the cemetery as far as trees and mowing and those type of costs. But you can see the amount of money we're talking about is not very much.
Well, yeah, especially the charge for services more than the investment earning.
Right. So we're looking at maybe $1,700 in
Oh, okay,
revenue
I see.
that we can spend. Yeah, the charges for services are around 3,000 between the openings and closings in the plot. So
Okay.
out of our
I see.
$16 million budget, the perpetual cemetery fund is not a significant amount, but it's out there and it's good. It does offset the costs slightly.
Yeah.
And that is all I have for our presentation. So we're up to commissioner questions. If there's ones you haven't asked, or if you want to go back and check any specific items, general thoughts.
Yeah, I just had some things I've been thinking about. Where do we stand with Green Acres?
We've done some of the calculations on what it would cost. We're actually considering, because it would be a pretty hefty SID on the people that are there that are currently living in Green Acres, waiting to see if we get awarded this grant for the sewer system at the Civic Center. And if we do, once we close it out, actually applying for that grant to help extend services to Green Acres. So we're kind of delaying the annexation until we can see if we can get some state money to help offset the cost to those residents as we extend the sewer into that area. So it's still moving forward. It's just we're looking to see if we can change the timing to help offset some of the cost.
And what about
Not a
their,
big expense.
yeah, what about their project right adjacent to it?
The Brookstone?
Yeah.
Actually, they just pulled 2 building permits on that. So there's 2 fourplexes that'll probably be going up in the next few months.
Sewer there already.
Yep, the sewer's already there. That's already set up.
That's all in.
What's the grant cycle, like 18 months?
It it is. It's actually, I think, on an annual basis. So you can't apply for one until the other one's completed, though.
And how long does that usually take?
Uh, we would probably looking at 18 to 24 months to make sure that grant was available.
Start of construction for the Civic Center.
Right. So we could apply again probably the fall of 20. I think it's just a
Green Acres. So yeah, we should take care of our stuff before we go start taking care of.
yes, but we just thought it would be
Yeah.
make it easier because it is going to be significant on
Yeah, that'd be.
on residents. Yeah, because it's going to cost a lot to extend the sewer up there.
Where does the land adjacent to the new hospital? And that's a floodplain, I understand.
Some of it is, but not very much of it. And most of it that is designated floodplain is actually designated park. So there isn't much to do there. Although we are in talks with the developer and the hospital about changing the zoning laws to allow planned use development. And then I think there would be some zoning out there that would encourage a mixed use project. I think they're looking at bringing that as a suggestion in the next few months, but we're probably looking at a year or 2 because that wouldn't happen until after the growth policy. But I think they're really interested in, I think the hospital's not interested in developing it, but I think they are interested in making sure that it develops in a way that's conducive for the hospital. So in a planned use development would probably have specific medical areas for development and then some residential and then some commercial, but it would be, yeah, but it would actually be all mixed together. That doesn't allow, none of our current zoning allows that. So I think that's what they're interested in. And so we're working with them to see what a new zoning ordinance would look like. And then kind of mix that into the growth policy process and hopefully come out the other side with something that would work for everybody.
I think that's one of the topics that the planning board had on their radar, mixed use development, if I remember
Because
correctly.
as
Yeah.
a commission, we're the last to hear anything about it. till-
What-
As a commission, we're the last to hear anything about
Well, they had,
any planned development and stuff like that unless,
but all these different like tools.
well, I mean,
for
unless it's
plan-
in the newspaper or something. I mean,
Yeah, well, I mean, depends on the project, I suppose.
Yeah.
But
This is
this
really
idea of
Livingston.
planned use development specifically is like a tool that is
Oh, yeah.
used in, so. it was
Yeah, I know.
something that
I remember now what
Yeah,
they're used for.
They were talking about it before I was on the board,
Oh,
planning
okay.
board, so.
Yeah, and I think it's something they're interested in adding that to the toolbox of zoning. What does that look like? How can we use it?
What does it mean
Um,
for Livingston? Yeah.
Right. Where would we allow it?
The way of
How would we
attracting
allow
I
it?
just think,
developer or
I just
something.
wanted to be clear that that was a planning board, that it's also coming from the planning board, so it doesn't sound like we're just catering to specific whims of our community, that it's actually like
Right.
an
no.
idea that has apparently
and
come up
it's
in the past.
it's fairly
before.
common across
Yeah.
municipalities to have a planned unit development type of zoning where they can specifically set out how a parcel of land would be used.
Very good. I don't, I don't see anything glaring. I'm on my 6th year, I think, and finally getting a feel for it now. Especially the way you've simplified it. I mean, it's.
She has
more
to,
of-
otherwise I
I
couldn't
mean,
understand
it's
it.
a lot. Well, I'm looking at page, not you.
That's what I'm saying. She has to, so I can understand it.
Yeah, but I mean, for the most part, somebody of average intelligence, I think, can pretty much make heads or tails of it.
Can I ask a question?
This is this is open.
Chair
yeah.
Schwartz,
You can talk over people with me. around.
co-chair, vice chair. I'm really curious about see what happens with the vote, like what the long-term plans are. I'm really concerned about our emergency services. And then the other thing basically what you're talking about is resiliency when you're talking about these big trucks and limited human power, resiliency and with unexpected events. I'm really curious about the thinking about the idea of resiliency with the north side and the water, stormwater. Are there any alternate alternate solutions to just draining all the water down into the stormwater pipes? Are there any other like alternative things you're thinking about when
Like
you
a
think about?
lake.
So there's actually a lot that goes with that, and yet we've actually talked about quite a few different ways to address it. Some of it's addressed with the new developments. Obviously, they have to retain enough
Mhm.
to meter the water off their property at the same rate it would be if it was still in the natural state. So there's a lot of retention ponds.
Mhm.
I think working with the ditch association to figure out if we can use that as a method to get some of the water to stop it from going all the way down the hill. Now it'll be limited to what the ditch can obviously hold,
Mhm.
and I'm sure they're going to want some kind of compensation for that, whether that's in-kind labor to help clear it out so that it doesn't flood in the spring, whatever it is. There's a lot to be done there to figure that part out. We're also looking at one of the long-term projects we're looking at is to extend the storm sewer at Yellowstone under the tracks. So there'd be another place where stormwater can cross the tracks. Right now, it pretty much all runs down to the underpass and goes from there. If we'd have to work with MRL to get the rights to bore under the tracks again, and they require casing, and there's a lot to go with that. But if we could hook it to the south side storm sewer system under the tracks at Yellowstone, that would take a lot of the pressure off the system at the underpass as well.
Is there any way to so this idea of retention ponds is like a more contemporary idea maybe, or it's being used more now than it would have been 100 years ago, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
So is there anything we can do with, I'm just thinking like there's already an impact from the homes that already exist. Is there anything that can be done like retroactively, or are we constrained by the fact that that's all developed and there's all that
I don't
water
think
just has
there's
to be
much open
siphoned off?
land that we
Yeah,
could
unless
use.
it was open landed.
I'm sorry, can you
Yeah.
say that again?
I think it's a combination. It's putting in a storm drain network that connects to our system that's south of the tracks, and a combination of utilizing the capacity that the ditch has would be the most cost feasible way.
It just seems like from a resiliency standpoint, the more we can retain water, right, within the system as opposed to just moving it out, there's like maybe some benefits there in different levels, but yeah. But this isn't my expertise.
Partnership with
Yeah.
even the Northtown development.
Yeah.
Now, 3 times in the last 6 years, we've had this melt off above
Mhm.
Ridgeview Trails. They've actually are putting some increased capacity within their stormwater retention ponds to help take into account of that. Even though it's not required by them by subdivision regs or DEQ, they witnessed the event this spring and are like, well, this certainly have an impact on the residents within our development. So we have an opportunity. We have the space to do this. We can increase the capacity. Now, is it going to solve the problem? It's probably not, depending on the volume of snow that melts off, but it's certainly going to reduce the impacts of our residents downstream in that 7th to 8th corridor.
Right. So I think we've talked about this quite a bit, just spitballing some ideas. I think you have to look at retaining it where you can,
Mhm.
diverting it to the ditch if it's possible, having another connection at Yellowstone, and even determining if storm sewer in to divert it towards Fleshman over by Star Road would be feasible for parts of it. Like, you're going to have to split it up as much as you can.
That's why I was wondering.
Discovery already discharging in the voyage ditch.
Right. And so can you get anything from the rest of the hill down that way? And there's a lot to involved in it. But I think the fundamental part, and this is what I was referencing earlier, is we have no source of revenue to pay for any of it. There is no money that's dedicated for storm sewer
Yeah.
at all. I think we are probably, especially because when we hit 10,000 people, we will be be required to be compliant with MS4 standards, which means we'll have to treat all of our runoff or a significant portion of it, and all of it. We currently, in the current project, we put in the first treatment ever of any stormwater in the city of Livingston, down Main Street. So now before it goes into Fleshman Creek from the storm sewer on Main Street, we have the storm scepter in. It'll physically separate some. But that is the only treatment of stormwater in the entire city. And once we break 10,000, we're required by the state to treat all of it. So
What's that gonna look like?
that's a disaster.
No, I mean, is it like, where's it going? Is it gonna be like this that you just described on Main Street? Like, it's
It-
gonna be
it'll
every
have to
point at which
go
it goes.
Any point that we're diverting it into. So if you look at the end of D is a great example where there's just that pipe that runs directly into Fleshman Creek, right? Everything that runs down the street there just runs through the culvert. That would not be acceptable. So you'd have to you'd either have to figure out how to retain it, whether that's through dry wells or other, probably things we don't have room for, or you would have to put in physical treatment before it gets there.
So it would be smart to retain as much as we can
Absolutely, as much as you can is
for
great
lots of reasons.
for lots of reasons. But that's where we need to. There's just, because of the layout of the town, there's just not much space to do that.
Right.
I think the hotels, they're planning on some kind of dry well, right? Some kind of retention.
It's actually an underground retention.
Yeah. So
The
the
one just over by the interstate, the new.
right, the new one they're looking at retaining it all on
That's
site.
awesome.
Yes.
That's great.
They still have, on-site retention ponds, but due to the limited size of the lot and the layout of the parking, very, very minimal. But, so they are doing all their stormwater retention underneath.
But that's a good location to do it, right? Because the water
Oh, it absolutely is.
totally
But
fills up the street there.
the proximity to the river, they need to be able to.
It'll be interesting
So
to see.
yeah.
as far as the
Yeah.
water level.
Is that in a cistern? They do it?
Pardon me?
Is that a cistern they put in or?
It's a glorified
Well-
backhoe.
Yeah, okay.
So, and that can be done because nothing has been built there, right? Like, they can start from scratch and put it in under their parking lot, where it'd be a lot harder to do that under Town and Country or Shopco.
As
Um,
things develop with this topic, I think it'd be great to get updates because it's like I think it's like a hot topic for folks on the north side.
So
Um,
long term, and you'll probably see this proposal for next year, I'm hoping, is we will probably need to create a storm sewer utility. So there will be a charge for storm sewer, just like there is for street maintenance or light maintenance or anything else, because if we don't start getting ahead of it, if we hit
What does that
10,000,
mean?
so
a charge for, what is it?
we haven't figured out I'm going to say how the revenue formula yet, because there's lots of ways you could do it. You could do a flat rate for all residents, where you pay so much a month all year round for storm sewer improvements. We could try and figure it out based on, I think street maintenance is done by square feet of the property. So it could be something where you have a larger property, you pay more. There's a lot of options on how that looks exactly, and we'll have to figure out what that looks like. But if we don't start getting ahead of this, we are going to come to a point where we have a requirement that we have absolutely no way to meet and no money to meet.
I'm really excited about this topic.
Great.
I think it's like a really important part of like community resiliency and like local communities taking care of themselves.
And some of it might be even,
Knowing what we're facing down the road.
Yeah, we
eventually.
have to be ready.
It's
so-
eventual, it's
Yeah.
gonna happen.
well, and
Yeah.
even things like, it floods, and I don't say floods, the water runs down the street every year out of Town and Country from Fleshman Creek, right? We don't really have a source of revenue to revitalize that part of the creek, to rehab it and make sure that it's wide enough that the The culverts under the streets are large enough to carry the volume. We work at it as best we can. The guys clean it out. They do everything they can. We're looking at removing some trees to increase the flow, but that's a project. Fleshman Creek, if you think about it, carries a significant portion of the stormwater runoff for Livingston. I mean, it starts out all the way at Star Edition and Discovery Vista, all that's running into Fleshman Creek there. Then it comes through Voyages, all the land back there comes under Town and Country and runs all the way down to the lagoon. So all of that area is eventually running into Fleshman Creek. And they did the rehab project how many years ago? On the 2014 from the outlet at the Yellowstone back up to the lagoon. And so that area is pretty good, but we haven't rehabbed from the lagoon to the north side of town. Yeah, to the Voyage property.
It's one of those I think it's one of those topics too where it will save people. It's not very exciting and you can't always see the benefit, but like if we don't do it, it'll be really expensive.
Right.
And if
Well-
we can do it well, it'll actually save everyone lots of money in the long term.
I know the people sandbagging their driveways would probably appreciate it.
Yeah.
I will say that, this community, definitely stepped up to the plate when we knew we needed to improve our wastewater treatment plant. We had rate increases in the magnitude of 11 and 13% in consecutive years. Stormwater is really not a lot different than that, especially since it's all going into our receiving streams, Fleshman Creek, Building Creek, the Yellowstone River, the lagoon. So, just to put it in perspective, the last 2 years, we've spent over $700,000 in stormwater improvements just in the downtown corridor. Our only funding mechanism is splitting those costs between street maintenance and actual sewer. So, having a standalone storm drain utility, which if you look at utility rate structures in Montana, the big six all have a storm drain utility. And on average, those are around anywhere from $4 to $8 per month. It's kind of an average fee for that. So, to put a storm drain system in one city block, you're looking at about $100,000 worth of work with the inlets and the piping.
So it's out there. So
Yeah.
So happy Thursday.
So important though.
So-
It's really good.
It's very important, and there again, we're really challenged because the only connection from the north side to the south side is the underpass. And when it was designed, it was not designed to accommodate the magnitude of development.
Right. And the continued infill, while good for development, isn't great for storm sewer, right? Like that's,
As far as future, north side development up there, like if the new subdivision came up, can we require more retention than?
we can only require the amount that would usually run off. So that we can limit them to the
Okay.
amount that usually runs off. Like Shannon said, we negotiated with Northtown to get a little larger capacity to help with the problem, which was great that they they stepped up and were willing to do that. But we can't force them to do any more than
Are
than
there
what they're
incentives for doing,
responsible for.
are there any incentives for them doing more?
There isn't currently.
Yeah,
Might be
we
an
could give them
idea.
Money, but yeah.
Well, I mean, there's
Yeah.
other ways to do incentives so
Yeah.
it saves citizens money, right?
Sure. And so that's Shannon's been mulling those ideas around, and I'm
I think our community we're very unique. And I think we have an opportunity where we can actually look in at using wetlands actually as pre-treatment and, even the area.
Let that
So
filter.
all the stormwater system on Gallatin Street actually empties into the wetlands behind the water reclamation facility.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
As long as I lived in a community where they did this to some extent, using wetlands for different uses. I think it's important to think about what the condition of the water is, right, that's going into those wetlands before it. Otherwise, it's a
Yeah, you
nightmare
don't want it storing.
situation.
Yeah.
Say that we need to also consider the back end of this. Once the infrastructure is in there, we need to have staff that actually can go out and maintain it. And
Mhm.
right now, our two-man sewer crew with our very nice back truck, that's set up perfectly for doing that. But it does take time.
Yeah. tired of people saying, well, you gotta cut the fat. Yeah. Man, that's pretty lean, employee wise and stuff like that. You kidding me? Doing a lot more with a lot less. Seems to me, every time I turn around.
There's a lot to do.
I'm- Oh, that's right, yeah.
Breaking it up, then backing it up, and then taking it to the wastewater plant to our drying bed. It takes a lot of work. That's a necessity when you have
So unless you have more questions, I can cover the next steps and how it will work.
Oh, there's more steps.
Well,
Oh, we're not leaving?
you can leave it. It'll take me 3 minutes.
Oh, I'm okay.
So,
Budgeted a couple hours.
there's no next steps for tonight, but for the 18th will be when you'll see the total budget proposal. So the whole book will come out. We're working on some of the to update some of the organizational charts. Paige is working on the data that goes in the front. It'll be mostly in this format, but there won't be quite as much information. We give you a little more information than we're going to put in the budget book. We're actually switching it around this year so that the summaries that we went through will be the main budget book, and then if people want to dig into line items, there'll be appendices in the back that
Oh,
they can
okay.
go to. We're trying to make it, while we're trying to leave all the information in there, we're trying to make it easier to read and easier for people to get snapshots of
But yeah,
where
that,
their money
that was the
goes.
whole idea behind this. Yeah.
Right. So on the 18th, you'll see the entire budget book. It'll have, it'll be the initial resolutions for the general fund for each of the enterprise funds. It'll also have the resolutions for the rate increases that we're talking about for solid waste and for the water system. So those will all come before you on the 18th. I will not be here on the 18th, so Paige and Lisa will be running that.
It's gonna be a free for all. Chair isn't gonna be here.
That's right. It's going to be Quentin's going to be running it. Lisa's going to be following it up. So we'll make a few changes from what you've seen, but just basically just the corrections we're talking about that didn't get in here. We'll make sure those are
So
cleaned
this
up.
is our first reading of it. And
It'll be the first reading. It'll be a public hearing, first reading. You'll vote on it, and then it'll come back in the meeting in July is when you'll finalize the budget.
I want to thank the staff people who work for the city, and Faith does a terrible job. That's really bad,
So,
but good. This is a very smooth, so it works
Yes.
very
I
Well,
like all the notes too.
well, and I think this is an outgrowth of doing the strategic plan.
Oh,
It makes
absolutely.
it much
That-
easier to look at.
makes everything make more sense.
Doesn't it?
You know, and it makes it, for me, and I'm able to explain it better to people. Make sure you fix that $1,800 water analysis thing so Pat doesn't find it.
That will be fixed before you get the next one. So those will be the next steps. You'll see it all again on the 18th. You can talk about it as much or as little as you want. If you just want to go through it so the public can hear it, if you just want to hit the highlights, Lisa will be running that, and then we'll do it again in July if there's any questions from the public.
And Paige
So-
will be here to answer. all
Paige
of the
will be here to
questions.
answer the questions. She knows more than
Because
I do
I
anyway.
can't.
She knows the most.
She does. So, any other questions?
I have none. Did you, you got what you want to cover, the storm sewer. Yeah. I have a motion for adjournment.
so moved.
Second.
Second.
Yep, he said that and he said that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, name. This concludes at
Okay.
6:30,
Not bad.
hour and a half. That is.
Not bad.
Thanks for being
long as
efficient
we
with
don't
your
have-
time.